I arrived late to the Christmas party and overheard my parents raising their glasses in a toast, and saying, "It's great that Matthew didn't come. Nobody likes having him here," my brother added. I quietly slipped out and called my lawyer. The party ended after only 15 minutes. Thanks so much for coming. Before I go into detail about how this crazy, freezing Christmas Eve ended with flashing police lights, leave a why in the comments below so I know you're ready. Grab a warm drink and listen to me tell the whole story. The Omaha wind was biting through my coat as I stepped onto the porch of the house I'd bought with my own money. Just as I raised my hand to knock, I heard my mother's cheerful voice booming through the door. "Everyone, raise a glass. It's great that Matthew didn't come tonight." A burst of laughter followed. Then my brother, Elijah, added with a smug grin. "Nobody likes him here anyway. Cheers to a real family." Those words were like a dagger to my chest. I stood there in the snow, completely motionless, while the clinking of glasses and the boisterous cheering continued inside, all while they were drinking my wine in the very house I had paid for. It was the exact house I bought in cash to give my aging parents a comfortable, worry-free retirement. Snow was falling gently from the black night sky, collecting on the expensive custom-made wreath hanging on the heavy oak front door. I had my right hand raised just inches from the brass knocker, completely ready to announce my arrival. I was exactly an hour late because of a massive unavoidable multi-car pileup on the icy interstate. And standing there, I was actually feeling a deep sense of guilt about keeping my family waiting for dinner. Then the festive holiday music playing inside suddenly dipped low and my mother's voice carried crystal clear through the frosted glass pane of the door. "Everyone glasses up," she announced. Her tone was incredibly bright, energetic, and completely devoid of the usual heavy complaining I was so used to hearing from her over the past few months. "Let's be honest for a second. It is absolutely great that Matthew didn't come today. Cheers to a stress-free holiday." A loud chorus of genuine laughter and the sharp, crisp sound of expensive crystal glasses clinking together echoed through the warm, brightly lit living room. I completely stopped breathing. My lungs just locked up. The expensive gift box I was holding in my left hand suddenly felt like a massive block of solid lead pulling my arm down. Then my older brother, Elijah, chimed in. His voice was dripping with that familiar, arrogant, entitled sneer he always used whenever my name came up in conversation. "No one likes having him here anyway. The guy is a walking talking buzzkill. Cheers to the real family." More laughter followed. More loud agreement. I stood there waiting for someone, anyone to speak up. But no one defended me. Not my father who was sitting right there. Not my aunts. Not my uncles. Just absolute toxic silent agreement from the very people sharing my bloodline. I didn't kick the door open. I didn't scream or make a scene. A few months ago, I might have stormed right into that living room and demanded answers with tears in my eyes. But standing in that freezing cold, staring at the warm yellow light spilling out onto the snowy porch, the very last lingering shred of hope I had for our family bond simply evaporated into the winter air. My chest didn't even ache anymore. It just felt completely hollow. A cold, hard realization settled deep into my bones. I carefully set the beautifully wrapped gift box down on the icy welcome mat. I turned around and walked back down the long shovel driveway to my parked car. The fresh snow crunched loudly under my heavy boots, but no one inside noticed a thing. They were way too busy drinking my expensive wine in the very house I paid for. I got into the driver's seat, locked the door securely, and watched my own breath fog up the cold windshield. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized over the last few agonizing weeks. He answered on the second ring. "Lincoln," I said, my voice completely steady and devoid of any emotion. "It's time. Execute the order." "Are you absolutely sure, Matthew?" my lawyer asked through the speaker, his voice tight with professional concern. "It's Christmas Eve. It's freezing out there. Once I make this call to the precinct, there is absolutely no going back. The sheriff's deputies are on standby." "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire 32 years on this earth," I replied, staring intensely at the dancing silhouettes moving behind the living room blinds of my stolen house. "Do it." I hung up the phone. Little did they know, their perfect, cruel little holiday gathering had exactly 15 minutes left before their entire world collapsed around them. But to fully understand how my family ended up facing the flashing red and blue lights of local law enforcement on a snowy Christmas night, I have to take you back. I have to show you the exact moment the mask finally slipped. 3 months earlier, 3 months before that freezing night on the porch, my cell phone rang persistently during a crucial high-stakes board meeting at my financial firm. It was my mother. She called 4 times in a row, bypassing my voicemail completely, thinking it was a severe medical emergency or a car accident. I immediately excused myself, stepped out of the glass-walled conference room into the quiet hallway, and answered. She didn't say hello. She just demanded that I come to their house immediately, not asked. Demanded with a tone of absolute panic and authority. I drove across town with my stomach tied in anxious knots, pushing my car slightly over the speed limit. When I finally walked into their living room, the atmosphere was thick and heavy. Felt exactly like a staged ambush. My father was pacing nervously by the stone fireplace. His hands clasped behind his back. My mother sat stiffly on the very edge of the leather sofa, clutching a tissue. And right in the center of the room, slouching disrespectfully in my favorite armchair, was my older brother, Elijah. Elijah is 3 years older than me. And for as long as I can remember, he has always been the absolute golden child of the family. While I spent my entire 20s working exhausting 80-hour weeks, climbing the brutal corporate ladder, securing my recent promotion, and carefully saving every single penny of my salary, Elijah was busy finding himself. His latest grand venture was a tech startup that supposedly developed high-end productivity software for large corporations. He immediately gave himself the shiny title of CEO, rented a ridiculously flashy downtown office space with floor-to-ceiling windows, and burned through his initial investors' cash like it was dry kindling in a bonfire. "Sit down, Matthew," my father instructed sternly, pointing a rigid finger to a hard dining chair that had been brought into the living room specifically for me. "What's going on?" I asked, refusing to sit, keeping my heavy leather briefcase firmly in my hand. "Is someone hurt?" Elijah let out a heavy, incredibly dramatic sigh, rubbing his temples as if he carried the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. "The tech market is highly volatile right now, Matt. We hit a temporary, completely unforeseeable cash flow snag. The bank is threatening to call in our primary business loan by the end of the week. He needs capital, Matthew." My mother cut in her eyes wide with manufactured desperate panic. "If he doesn't get a major cash injection by this Friday, the bank will seize everything. He loses the company. He loses everything he has built over the last 2 grueling years." I looked directly at Elijah. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. He just stared at the rug. "How much is the current shortfall?" I asked calmly. $120,000, Elijah mumbled into his hand. I let out a harsh, sharp breath that echoed in the quiet room. $120,000, Elijah, that's not a temporary snag. That is a massive financial crater. Where are your accounting books? Open your laptop right now. Let me see your actual balance sheets. It's highly complicated. You wouldn't understand the tech sector overhead and marketing demands. Elijah deflected immediately, his jaw tightening with defensiveness. "I manage multi-million-dollar corporate investment portfolios for a living." I shot back, stepping forward and closing the distance between us. "I understand overhead just fine. Show me the books or I am turning around and walking out that front door right now." Reluctantly, with a heavy roll of his eyes, Elijah pulled a silver laptop from his designer messenger bag and brought up his company's financial records. I spent the next 45 grueling minutes scrolling through the absolute disaster he called an accounting ledger. My blood pressure spiked dangerously with every single line item I read. There was absolutely no market volatility to blame here. It was pure unadulterated financial negligence. He was actively expensing 5-star luxury hotel stays under the guise of networking, paying for an elite, ridiculously expensive country club membership, and treating his executives to weekly $1,000 steakhouse dinners. You spent $4,000 on a weekend corporate retreat to Aspen last month while your core revenue dropped by 40%. I asked loudly, pointing a firm, angry finger directly at the glowing screen. "You have to spend money to make money, Matthew. It's about projecting an image of success to potential clients." Elijah snapped back, finally looking up at me with eyes full of pure, unmasked resentment. I slammed his laptop shut so hard, the loud crack made my mother jump in her seat. "No, I am absolutely not throwing my hard-earned salary into a bottomless pit so you can continue to play pretend CEO." My mother gasped loudly, pressing both hands tightly to her chest as if I had just struck her. "Matthew, how can you be so incredibly cruel? You just got a massive promotion at your firm. You have more than enough sitting in your savings account right now to help your own flesh and blood." They didn't see my success as my own achievement. To them, my bank account was just an early inheritance pool, a convenient family slush fund for Elijah to dip into whenever his delusions of grandeur crashed into reality. My recent promotion is the direct result of working weekends, holidays, and late nights for 5 years straight, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and controlled, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. It is not a personal bailout fund for Elijah's gross irresponsibility. The answer is absolutely no. My father suddenly stopped his nervous pacing. His face turned a deep, furious shade of red. "You listen to me right now," he growled, stepping aggressively into my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Family takes care of family. Period. We raised you. We put a solid roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us this. You owe your brother this. I owe you." I laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. It was a dry, bitter noise. "Dad, I bought this entire house for you. I pay the property taxes every single year. I pay for the landscaping, the repairs, the internet. I even gave you and Mom supplemental platinum credit cards for groceries, gas, and whatever else you needed so you wouldn't have to stress for a single second about your retirement funds. And you hold it over our heads constantly like a tyrant," my mother yelled, actual tears of anger and frustration welling in her eyes, spilling over her cheeks. "Your own brother is drowning right in front of you, and you are standing there coldly counting your pennies. You are a cold, calculated, incredibly selfish person, Matthew. You clearly care more about your spreadsheets and your bank balances than your own family. Her words hit me like a physical heavy blow to the stomach. For years, I had bent over backward trying to buy their genuine affection. I genuinely thought that if I was just successful enough, generous enough, helpful enough, they would eventually look at me the exact same way they looked at Elijah. But standing there watching them completely bare their teeth like cornered animals to defend the son who was actively bankrupting himself through sheer stupidity, I finally saw the brutal, undeniable truth of my existence in this family. I was just a wallet to them, an ATM machine with a heartbeat. Fine, I said softly, the anger suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my cell phone. I quickly opened my secure banking application. What are you doing? Elijah asked, his eyes narrowing with sudden suspicion as he watched my thumbs fly across the screen. I'm taking Mom's advice. I'm being selfish, I replied calmly. With a few deliberate taps on the glowing screen, I navigated to the authorized user settings on my primary accounts. I am permanently canceling the supplemental credit cards I gave you and Mom. I am also immediately canceling the automatic wire transfers that cover the monthly utility bills for this house. You want to enable his delusions? Do it on your own dime from now on. My mother let out a shrill, piercing scream of pure disbelief. You wouldn't dare do that to us. It's already done, I said, sliding the phone smoothly back into my jacket pocket. I looked my father dead in the eye, refusing to back down an inch. I will continue to pay the primary mortgage and the property taxes strictly because my legal name is on the deed, and I won't ruin my own credit. But as of this exact second, the family gravy train is officially derailed. Do not call me for money ever again. I turned firmly on my heel and walked straight out the front door, leaving it wide open behind me. I completely ignored my father, angrily yelling my name from the front porch. The long drive back to my downtown apartment was completely, suffocatingly silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't make any calls. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. That specific afternoon marked the official beginning of a bitter, freezing cold war within our family. They cut me off entirely. There were no more text messages. No more casual phone calls. No more Sunday dinner invitations. They desperately wanted to punish me. They wanted to starve me of the basic family connection I had always craved, fully expecting that I would eventually break down, apologize, and crawl back to them with an open checkbook in my hand. I absolutely refused to break. I threw myself entirely into my corporate work. I spent my long evenings lifting heavy weights at the gym or sitting alone in my quiet, dark apartment, constantly trying to convince my own brain that I had done the right thing. But the sudden, absolute silence from my family was deafening. And it left a deep, painful crack in my emotional armor that someone was more than willing to quietly exploit. 2 agonizing weeks into the strict silent treatment, my cell phone buzzed loudly on my kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed brightly, showing Aunt Sarah's name. She was my mother's younger sister, the warm woman who always baked my absolute favorite chocolate chip cookies when I was a kid. She seemed to be the only relative in our extended family tree who ever genuinely listened to me without an ulterior motive. I hesitated for a long moment, watching the phone vibrate against the granite. But the crushing, heavy loneliness of the past 14 days finally made me swipe right to answer the call. Matthew, sweetheart, her warm, incredibly soothing voice drifted softly through the speaker. I've been so incredibly worried about you. How are you holding up, honey? I let out a long, shaky breath that I didn't even know I was holding. It's been really rough. And Sarah, they haven't spoken a single word to me since the massive argument in the living room. I know, honey. I know, she cooed sympathetically, her tone dripping with maternal concern. Your mother is just being incredibly stubborn right now. She's deeply upset and stressed about Elijah's failing business situation, but she absolutely shouldn't be taking her frustrations out on you. You did exactly what you thought was right to protect yourself. For the next 20 solid minutes, Aunt Sarah patiently let me vent every single frustration I had bottled up. I told her exactly how betrayed and used I felt. I told her how mentally exhausted I was from carrying the massive financial burden for people who didn't respect my hard work or my boundaries. You just need to focus entirely on yourself right now, she advised softly, sounding like a true confidant. How are things at the firm? Are you managing to stay busy to keep your mind off things? Very busy, I admitted, actually feeling grateful for the sudden change of subject. I actually have a huge multi-million-dollar corporate merger I'm personally overseeing right now. I'm practically sleeping at the office. Next week, I have to fly out to Chicago for 3 days straight just to finalize the legal paperwork with the acquiring company. Oh, you poor thing. Working so incredibly hard, she said, her voice full of pity. Well, you just keep your head down and focus on your career. I'll slowly try to talk some sense into your parents when the time is right and tempers have cooled. Just keep me updated on how you are doing. Okay. I love you, Matthew. Love you, too, Aunt Sarah. I replied sincerely, actually feeling a small comforting spark of warmth ignite in my chest for the first time in weeks. Over the next month and a half, Aunt Sarah became my absolute only lifeline to the rest of the family. She called me religiously twice a week. We talked constantly about my demanding work schedule, my high stress levels, and my upcoming out-of-state business trips. She always sounded so incredibly supportive and understanding. She expertly made me feel like I wasn't entirely crazy or selfish for finally setting financial boundaries with my parents. I was so desperately hungry for a mother figure, so desperate for someone in my own bloodline to validate my existence and my feelings that I was completely blinded because of that deep blinding desperation. I never once noticed how oddly specific her questions were becoming. I never noticed that she always seemed intensely, almost suspiciously curious about exactly what days I would be flying out of town, or exactly how busy I was with my corporate lawyer finalizing my firm's complicated contracts. I didn't realize I was voluntarily feeding my daily itinerary directly to a snake in the grass. I didn't know that the second she was hanging up the phone with me, she was immediately dialing my parents' house, enthusiastically passing along every single piece of private information they needed to safely maneuver behind my back. I truly thought I had a loyal ally in my corner. In reality, I was voluntarily handing them the exact detailed map to my blind spots so they could strike when I wasn't looking. 2 full months had passed since the massive relationship-ending blowout in my parents' living room. I was sitting quietly at my kitchen island on a dreary, rainy Saturday morning, slowly sipping a mug of black coffee when my best friend and personal financial advisor, Carter, let himself into my apartment using his spare key. He looked incredibly agitated. He aggressively threw his wet rain jacket onto a dining chair and practically shoved his glowing smartphone directly into my face. "Have you seen this absolute garbage yet?" Carter asked, his brow deeply furrowed in severe confusion and anger. I leaned back and squinted at the bright screen. It was Elijah's public social media page. The newest post uploaded just hours ago was a high-resolution picture of my older brother casually leaning against the sleek hood of a brand new jet black Porsche 911. He was wearing expensive designer sunglasses and a smug smile. The arrogant caption beneath the photo read, "Hard work and relentless grinding always pays off. Upgrading the daily commute to match the vision. Number seal number, blessed number self-made." I stared blankly at the image, my brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible information. "When exactly was this posted?" "Late last night," Carter said, immediately pulling the phone back and swiping aggressively to the next picture on the timeline. It was a candid shot of my parents and Elijah sitting in a private booth, happily clinking expensive champagne glasses together at the most high-end exclusive steakhouse in downtown Omaha. "I completely don't understand," I muttered, shaking my head slowly, trying to clear the confusion. "Carter, I physically looked at his accounting books just 2 months ago. He was 120 grand in the hole. He couldn't make payroll. The bank was legally threatening to seize his business assets and his office furniture. I cut off my parents' credit cards that same day. They have absolutely zero expendable income of their own. Where in the hell did a brand new Porsche 911 come from?" Carter, who professionally knew my family's disastrous financial situation almost as well as I did, crossed his arms tightly across his chest and leaned heavily against the granite counter. "That is exactly why I drove all the way over here in the pouring rain. Someone standing on the absolute terrifying verge of complete corporate bankruptcy cannot simply swipe a maxed-out credit card to purchase a luxury sports car unless he suddenly stumbled upon a massive pile of money from thin air. Maybe he miraculously found a really dumb gullible angel investor." I suggested weakly, though I absolutely didn't believe my own words. No venture capitalist in their right logical mind would look at Elijah's horrific burn rate and voluntarily hand him a blank check. "Matthew, look at the strict math," Carter said grimly, his financial mind working in overdrive. "A brand new Porsche 911 is at least $130,000 minimum, plus luxury vehicle taxes, plus the exorbitant insurance premium for a guy with his terrible driving record. Add the $1,000 steakhouse dinners. Add the fact that his company doors are somehow still open and the lights are still on. We are actively looking at a sudden unexplained influx of nearly $200,000 in hard cash." A terrifying freezing cold knot of pure dread suddenly formed deep in the pit of my stomach. My parents didn't have that kind of liquid money hidden away. They had meager, heavily restricted retirement savings accounts which they legally couldn't touch without massive penalties and which they absolutely refused to drain. And Elijah's personal credit score was an absolute laughable joke. They couldn't possibly get a legitimate bank loan. I said, thinking out loud, my voice trembling slightly. No reputable bank in the state would touch them without massive secure collateral. The exact moment the heavy word collateral left my mouth, the air in my kitchen seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. I slowly looked up at Carter. He was already staring right back at me, his eyes wide with the exact same horrific, sickening realization dawning on his face. "The house?" Carter whispered, stating the unimaginable. "My house," I corrected, my heart suddenly beginning to hammer violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't waste another single second. I grabbed my laptop off the coffee table, fired it up instantly, and frantically searched my encrypted contacts for the direct phone number of a private investigator. His name was Wyatt. He was a former detective that a senior partner at my firm had successfully used during an incredibly messy, high-stakes corporate divorce case last year. He was known for being expensive, incredibly aggressive, and highly discreet. I immediately sent him an encrypted email with Elijah's full name, my parents' legal names, the address of the house, and a simple urgent message. I need to know exactly where the money came from. Track every single cent immediately. I was about to find out that the rabbit hole they dug went much deeper and much darker than my worst nightmares could have ever imagined. I met Wyatt, the private investigator, exactly 3 days later inside a dimly lit, nondescript diner located on the absolute edge of town. It was the kind of place where nobody asked questions. He was a quiet, intensely focused man who drank his bitter coffee black and didn't believe in wasting words on pleasantries. The moment I slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite him, he immediately handed me a thick manila preliminary folder directly across the sticky laminate table. Financial records always leave a permanent, undeniable digital trail, Wyatt said, his voice a low, rough gravel that barely carried over the hum of the diner's old refrigerator. People who suddenly come into massive sums of highly questionable cash always get extremely arrogant. They start thinking they're invisible to the system. Your older brother is currently leaving an arrogant financial footprint a mile wide. I quickly flipped through the crisp pages. Wyatt's initial investigation had already successfully tracked massive unexplained cash deposits directly hitting Elijah's failing business accounts. Those deposits were followed immediately by aggressive, panicked payouts to his most threatening corporate creditors and a massive uncharacteristic wire transfer to the local Porsche dealership for the down payment. Do we know the exact original source of the funds yet? I asked, my grip tightening on the edges of the manila folder until my knuckles popped. Not definitively. Not yet, Wyatt explained calmly, taking a slow sip of his coffee. I have a highly reliable buddy working inside the county clerk's office pulling the local property and banking records right now as we speak. Because of the bureaucracy, it usually takes a few days to get the certified hard copies into our hands. Wyatt leaned forward suddenly, pointing a thick, calloused finger directly at the center of my chest. Listen to me very closely, Matthew. Whatever you suspect your family did to get this money, you absolutely cannot show your hand right now. You have to maintain a completely normal, oblivious attitude. If you spook them even a little bit, they might panic and start aggressively moving assets around into offshore accounts or destroying physical evidence. You have to act like you know absolutely nothing. I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, feeling a massive, suffocating weight settling heavily onto my shoulders. I can do that. I can play the game. It was far easier said than actually done. The very next afternoon, I walked down to the mailroom in the busy lobby of my apartment building. Wedged tightly between the useless junk mail and my monthly electric bill was a thick, highly festive, bright red envelope. The elegant cursive handwriting right on the front clearly belonged to my mother. I ripped it open alone in the ascending elevator. It was a formal, beautifully printed invitation to an annual Christmas Eve dinner party. It's being hosted at the exact suburban house that I legally owned. Tucked neatly inside the card was a handwritten note on expensive textured cardstock. Matthew, we know things have been incredibly tense and difficult between us lately. Let's put our silly, stubborn financial disagreements firmly in the past where they belong. We are still a family and blood is thicker than water. Please come to the Christmas party this year. We truly want to celebrate the holidays together. Happily reunited. Dinner is served right at 700 p.m. With all our love, Mom and Dad. I stared intensely at the note, my stomach churning violently with absolute disgust. The tone was so incredibly fake, so uncharacteristically forgiving and sweet. They had completely ignored my existence for months, treating me like a diseased pariah. Now, suddenly, while Elijah was recklessly driving a luxury sports car he couldn't possibly afford, they desperately wanted to play the role of a happy, reunited family. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted Wyatt a clear picture of the invitation. His brief reply came exactly 30 seconds later. This is absolutely perfect timing. Accept the invitation immediately. It gives me the perfect psychological cover to finish digging without them suspecting a thing. And it keeps them completely blind to the fact that we are currently investigating them. So, I forced myself to play my required part in their twisted play. I immediately texted Aunt Sarah, falsely, telling her I had received the lovely invitation and was seriously thinking of going to finally make peace with everyone. She practically squealed with absolute delight over the phone, telling me how incredibly proud she was of me for finally maturing and being the bigger person. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached, her politely, and promised her I would absolutely be there. I was perfectly setting the stage, completely unaware of the absolute devastating nuclear bomb Wyatt was about to drop right onto my desk. Exactly 1 week before the upcoming Christmas holiday, Wyatt smoothly bypassed the busy receptionist at my corporate firm and walked straight into my private glass-walled office. He firmly closed the heavy oak door behind him and locked it with a sharp click. He didn't say a single word as he quickly pulled a massive legally bound dossier from his battered leather briefcase and dropped it heavily onto the exact center of my pristine mahogany desk. The loud thud echoed ominously in the quiet room. It's infinitely worse than you originally thought, Wyatt said, taking a seat opposite me, his face devoid of any comforting expressions. My hands were actually visibly shaking as I slowly reached out and opened the heavy cover. The very first page staring back at me was a certified stamped copy of a massive mortgage loan agreement from a prominent, highly respected local bank. The staggering loan amount highlighted aggressively in bright neon yellow ink made my blood run cold. $185,000. They actually took out a mortgage? I asked, my voice barely a hoarse whisper as my brain struggled to process the sheer audacity. How is that even legally possible? My name is the only one on the deed. I bought that house in straight cash. When I bought it, my lawyer, Lincoln, explicitly drafted an ironclad property revocation clause stating that absolutely no liens, loans, or structural alterations could be made without my physical notarized signature present in the room. Wyatt reached calmly across the desk and flipped the heavy packet to the third page of the dossier. Look very closely at the bottom signature line, Matthew. I leaned forward and stared down at the crisp white paper. There, sitting perfectly on the solid black ink line, was my exact signature, except I knew for an absolute fact it wasn't mine. It was a terrifyingly accurate, calculated forgery, perfectly mimicking the exact unique loop of the M and the specific sharp slant of the W that I exclusively used on all my official corporate documents. They blatantly forged your signature, Wyatt stated flatly, verbalizing the absolute nightmare sitting right in front of me. Your parents actively maliciously assisted Elijah in intentionally forging federal property documents. They confidently presented this fake paperwork to the bank, officially and illegally removing the protective revocation clause you originally put in place. Then they boldly used your residential property as massive collateral to illegitimately borrow $185,000 against a physical asset they do not legally own. All the air was violently sucked right out of the room. I felt physically sick. A wave of nausea washing over me. The sheer calculated audacity, the absolute chilling lack of basic human morality required to orchestrate this level of deception against your own son. It completely blew my mind. The bank just blindly accepted a piece of paper? I asked, feeling my shock rapidly morphing into a boiling white-hot anger. A sensitive legal document like that strictly requires a certified notary public to physically verify my identity with a state ID in person. How in the hell did they successfully bypass the standard rigorous verification procedures? Wyatt's expression darkened significantly. He leaned back slowly in the leather chair. That specific question brings us to the second much uglier part of the file. Flip to page 10. Look closely at the raised notary stamp. I turned the thick pages with trembling fingers. At the very bottom of the forged revocation document, right next to my fake signature was a raised official seal and a messy signature of the officiating notary public. I carefully read the printed name stamped cleanly below the seal. Joseph Miller. My jaw literally dropped open. The entire room started to spin dizzily around me. Joseph. I choked out. The word tasting like ash in my mouth. No. That's absolutely impossible. Joseph Miller wasn't just some random faceless guy in a cheap suit working at a strip mall. He was my former college roommate. We had sweat together playing on the same intramural basketball team for 3 years. He had eaten Thanksgiving turkey dinner at my parents' dining table multiple times when he couldn't afford a plane ticket to fly back to his own home state. I was the one who had stayed up late helping him study and drill flashcards for his incredibly difficult state licensing exams. We were brothers in everything but blood. Your older brother? Wyatt explained calmly, watching the devastation wash over my face. Quietly approached Miller exactly 3 weeks after the day you cut off their credit cards. We found out that Miller's independent notary business has been severely struggling for the past year. He was drowning in debt. Your brother confidently offered him a flat, untraceable $10,000 cash kickback directly from the loan proceeds simply to look the other way and officially stamp the forged documents without you actually being present in the room. I gripped the hard wooden edges of my desk so tightly my forearms ached and my knuckles turned stark white. A blinding white-hot fury suddenly washed over my entire body, completely, permanently erasing any lingering pathetic sadness I still held for my family. The betrayal was absolute, cutting through every single layer of my life. My parents actually knew about his involvement, I asked, my voice suddenly turning to pure freezing ice. Your mother is the exact person who physically forged your signature, Wyatt confirmed coldly, tapping a supplementary, highly detailed handwriting analysis report he had strategically included in the back of the file. She meticulously practiced it dozens of times on scratch paper we physically recovered from their outside trash bins. Your father happily drove the finalized fake paperwork directly to Joseph Miller's office downtown. Elijah then arrogantly took the notarized fraudulent packet straight to the loan officer at the bank. They had all actively conspired against me, my own mother, my own father, my golden child brother, and a man I had foolishly considered a fiercely loyal friend. They had sat around a table together, looked covetously at the successful, stable life I had built from nothing, and collectively decided they had the absolute right to completely steal it just to fund Elijah's fragile, massive ego. They consciously committed severe federal mortgage fraud, actively risking decades in a federal penitentiary just so Elijah could keep aggressively playing a fake CEO and driving a ridiculous Porsche 911 around town to impress people he didn't even like. Wyatt, I said, my voice now completely devoid of any human emotion. I didn't feel like a heartbroken son anymore. I felt exactly like a ruthless, calculating prosecutor preparing for a death penalty trial. I want you to make 3 exact, high-quality copies of this entire dossier. Keep one safely locked in a secure, fireproof vault at your office. Leave this original one sitting right here with me. And the 3rd copy? Wyatt asked, already standing up and quickly packing his gear back up into his battered briefcase. The 3rd copy goes directly to my lawyer by a bonded courier. Immediately, I ordered, my eyes locked dead onto the forged signature of my own mother, because I am going to legally burn their entire pathetic little fantasy world straight to the ground. The second Wyatt walked out of my office, I immediately picked up my phone and dialed Lincoln. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to scream or ask the universe why me. The time for feeling pathetic and sorry for myself was permanently over. They had officially crossed the absolute boundary from toxic, annoying family dynamics directly into the territory of severe felony financial crimes. I was taking the gloves completely off. I sat rigidly in Lincoln's plush, ridiculously expensive downtown law office later that exact same afternoon. The beautiful, sprawling skyline of the city stretched out behind his massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, but my intense focus was entirely locked on the sharp, notoriously ruthless attorney sitting directly across from me. Lincoln meticulously reviewed Wyatt's entire dossier in complete, heavy silence. The only sound in the large room was the rhythmic ticking of a vintage grandfather clock in the corner and the sharp rustle of thick paper as he turned the pages. When he finally looked up at me, his normally stoic eyes were wide with genuine professional shock. Matthew, listen to me. I have seen incredibly wealthy families fight viciously over a multi-million-dollar inheritance. I have seen incredibly bitter, violent divorce and custody battles that destroy lives. But this specific situation is incredibly stupidly brazen. It is a severe, undeniable felony offense. What your family orchestrated is wire fraud, bank fraud, and malicious identity theft, all seamlessly rolled into one massive criminal conspiracy. Can we legally win this without dragging it out for years? I asked, cutting straight through the legal jargon to the absolute chase. Win? Lincoln scoffed loudly, adjusting his expensive silk tie with a smirk. This isn't a civil lawsuit, Matthew, this is a legal slaughter. The physical evidence Wyatt gathered is absolutely irrefutable. The digital trail they left is a permanent glowing neon record. I can confidently have a federal judge look at this exact file and grant us total unmitigated victory to reclaim your stolen assets before the bank executives even finish their morning coffee tomorrow. I don't just want the financial assets back, I said, leaning forward aggressively, resting my elbows heavily on my knees, staring intensely into Lincoln's eyes. I want them entirely out of my house, out of my life permanently. Lincoln nodded slowly, picking up a heavy gold pen and tapping it against his desk. If that's what you want, we immediately file for a severe emergency eviction order. Based entirely on the undeniable fact that they are actively committing severe federal fraud right on the premises and directly endangering the property's legal and financial standing, a judge will absolutely sign off on immediate execution. There will be absolutely no 30-day notice given, no warning, no chance to appeal before they are removed. When exactly can we get the order signed and ready? I demanded. If I push my contacts at the courthouse, I can have it officially signed by a judge by this Friday afternoon. Lincoln calculated, quickly checking his digital desk calendar. Friday, Christmas Eve, the exact specific night they were proudly hosting their little fake reconciliation dinner party right inside my stolen house. A dark, incredibly satisfying sense of poetic justice immediately settled deep in my mind. Do it, I told him without a single millisecond of hesitation. Get the emergency order signed on Friday. We execute it that exact same night. While they are happily toasting their stolen money and laughing about how incredibly stupid I am, I want the armed authorities walking forcefully through the front door. Are you absolutely certain about the timing? Lincoln asked, professionally playing devil's advocate to ensure I wouldn't back out. It will be incredibly messy. It will be highly public in front of their guests. They are still your parents, Matthew. They stopped being my parents the exact second my mother picked up a pen to maliciously forge my name, I replied coldly, standing up to leave. They consciously made their criminal choice. Now they get the devastating consequences. For the next few grueling days, Lincoln and his elite legal team worked tirelessly around the clock. We strategically reviewed every single legal loophole to ensure my family would have absolutely no escape routes. Meanwhile, I had to play my agonizing part. I had to smile brightly through the searing pain and pretend I was the clueless, desperate son, eager to get back into their good graces. The absolute final countdown to Christmas had officially begun. The entire week leading up to Christmas Eve was undeniably the most agonizing, exhausting psychological test of my entire life. I had to strictly compartmentalize my raging, boiling fury and perfectly act like a man who was absolutely thrilled and deeply grateful to be invited back to the family dinner table. I couldn't let a single drop of my true intentions leak out. My cell phone buzzed incessantly throughout the week. It was constantly Aunt Sarah playing her twisted role to perfection. So incredibly excited to finally see you on Friday, Matthew. Are you still bringing the expensive wine you usually get? Your mother is making the huge roast you love. I stared blankly at the text message on my screen. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was actively making sure I was still coming, confirming my exact movements so my parents could perfectly coordinate their fake welcoming act. Before I arrived, I typed back a cheerful, completely fake reply. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Aunt Sarah. I got a truly great bottle of Cabernet just for the occasion. Then on Friday afternoon, the absolute final piece of the devastating trap snapped perfectly into place. Lincoln called me exactly at 3:00 p.m., while I was sitting in my office. The presiding judge just officially signed the emergency eviction order, Lincoln confirmed, his voice incredibly professional and tight with anticipation. It is fully authorized by the court. The local sheriff's department already has a certified copy in their hands. They are actively expecting your call tonight to coordinate the exact time of forced entry. Thank you, Lincoln, for everything, I said quietly, staring out at the gray, heavily snowy sky outside my corporate apartment window. At 5:30 p.m., I got dressed in a nice, thick holiday sweater and grabbed the fake decoy gift box I had wrapped earlier. I also grabbed the ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. I got into my car and began the long drive toward the suburbs. That's exactly when fate unexpectedly intervened to make the timing of my revenge even more incredibly perfect. A massive semi-truck completely jackknifed across the icy interstate, violently shutting down all moving lanes. Traffic instantly came to a dead, freezing halt. I picked up my phone and dialed Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah, it's Matthew. I'm completely stuck in horrible gridlock on I-80. There's a massive multi-car accident. I'm going to be at least an hour late to the party. Oh no, she said immediately, her voice dripping with incredibly fake disappointment. That's terrible, honey. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll wait for you to carve the roast. Drive safe in the snow. She hung up the phone quickly. I knew with absolute 100% certainty that she immediately walked right back into the living room and loudly announced to my entire family that the coast was clear. The mark was significantly delayed. They could safely drop the exhausting act and happily celebrate their successful criminal heist without having to look at my face for another entire hour. I sat in my idling, warm car, simply watching the thick snow fall heavily on my windshield, feeling a surprisingly strange sense of absolute calm wash over me. The crushing anxiety of the past 3 months was entirely gone. The deep emotional hurt was permanently gone. I was just patiently waiting for the clock to finally strike zero. Which brings us right back to the exact freezing moment where we started this incredible story. After an agonizing hour of slowly creeping through the snow-packed highway, I finally pulled into their quiet suburban neighborhood. The surrounding streets of Omaha were completely covered in a freezing, peaceful, absolute silence. I deliberately parked my car 2 houses down from the property, intentionally keeping my headlights completely off so they wouldn't see me arrive. I walked silently up the long driveway, stepping very carefully to avoid making any crunching noise in the fresh snow, and stood right on the wooden porch. That is exactly when I heard it through the door. It's great that Matthew didn't come today. Cheers to a stress-free holiday. No one likes having him here anyway. The guy is a walking buzzkill. Cheers to the real family. The raw, completely genuine laughter that immediately followed their cruel, malicious toast was the absolute, undeniable final straw. It permanently shattered any microscopic, desperate illusion I might have still harbored that this was just a terrible mistake or that they were somehow forced into it by sheer desperation. No, they absolutely enjoyed this. They thoroughly enjoyed stealing from me and they genuinely enjoyed mocking me behind my back while spending my money. I calmly set the wrapped gift box down on the mat. I walked quickly back to my parked car, sat firmly in the driver's seat, and made the final devastating call to Lincoln. Execute the order immediately without any further delay. I told him, watching the brightly lit windows of the house I legally owned. Their cruel, fraudulent party has officially reached its permanent end tonight. After hanging up with Lincoln, I immediately made a secondary direct call to the main dispatch officer at the sheriff's department, confirming my identity and officially requesting the immediate execution of the signed judicial order. Units are exactly 3 minutes out from your location. Sir, the gruff dispatcher confirmed over the radio static. I sat completely silently behind the steering wheel. I didn't even turn the car heater on. I just intensely watched the dark shadows of the oblivious partygoers moving happily across the living room blinds. I watched them continuously raise their glasses in celebration. I vividly imagined Elijah arrogantly smirking, jingling the heavy keys to his fraudulent Porsche right in his pocket. I imagined my mother happily playing the perfect gracious host, completely unbothered by the undeniable fact that she had maliciously committed a federal crime using my identity. There was absolutely no remaining guilt left inside my heart. They had consciously, deliberately chosen to treat my existence as nothing more than a convenient unlimited bank account. They had eagerly made their bed with forged signatures and stolen mortgage money. Suddenly, the quiet, snowy residential street was violently illuminated by the harsh, rapidly rotating sweep of bright red and blue lights. 3 fully marked police cruisers turned the corner sharply, their heavy tires crunching aggressively over the packed snow. They didn't use their loud sirens, but the intense flashing lights violently painted the entire front of my stolen house in chaotic, terrifying colors for heavily armed, serious law enforcement officers stepped out of the vehicles. They marched briskly and purposefully up the driveway, their heavy boots thudding loudly against the concrete. They absolutely didn't bother knocking gently. The lead officer pounded his heavy fist aggressively and relentlessly against the heavy wooden front door. The crushing exhaustion of the last 3 months completely vanished from my body. I leaned forward slightly in the driver's seat, resting my hands firmly on the steering wheel and watched eagerly as the front door swung open. The quiet eye of the storm had finally passed. The real devastating legal hurricane was about to completely tear their fake lives apart. I watched from the cold, dark interior of my parked car as the lead sheriff's deputy pounded his heavy fist against the solid oak front door of my house. The festive holiday music blaring from the living room speakers was instantly cut off. The front door swung open, revealing my father. He was holding a crystal glass of my expensive red wine, wearing a smug, relaxed sweater, completely oblivious to the absolute nightmare standing on his porch. "Is there a problem, officers?" my father asked, his voice dripping with that arrogant upper-middle-class entitlement he always used to intimidate service workers. "We are having a private family Christmas party here. Are you the current resident of this property?" the lead deputy asked, his voice a booming, no-nonsense baritone that carried perfectly through the crisp freezing night air. "I am the homeowner." "Yes." My father lied smoothly, taking a sip of his wine. The deputy didn't even blink. He reached into his thick winter jacket and pulled out the legally binding, heavily stamped emergency eviction order Lincoln had secured just hours ago. He shoved the paperwork directly into my father's chest. "Actually, sir, you are not the homeowner," the deputy stated loudly, stepping forward and forcing my father to back up into the entryway. "According to this emergency order signed by a federal judge this afternoon, the legal owner of this property is Matthew, and he has officially requested your immediate forced removal from these premises due to ongoing criminal financial activities. You and every single person inside this house have exactly 60 minutes to pack your essential belongings and vacate the property, or you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." I could see the exact second my father's brain stopped working. The smug confidence completely melted off his face, replaced by a pale, sickening horror. He dropped his expensive wine glass. It shattered loudly against the hardwood floor, splashing red liquid everywhere. "This is a mistake," my mother shrieked, suddenly appearing in the doorway behind him, clutching her pearl necklace. "Matthew is my son. He bought this house for us. You cannot do this on Christmas Eve. Ma'am, I suggest you grab some garbage bags and start packing your coats," the second deputy ordered, stepping right past her into the warm living room. "The clock is ticking." I watched as the police officers forcefully entered the crowded house, their heavy boots tracking dirty wet snow all over the pristine rugs. They completely interrupted the ongoing holiday festivities with unquestionable authority. They sternly ordered all the confused, terrified guests to immediately disperse from the premises. The completely bewildered partygoers, people who just 10 minutes ago were laughing at my deliberate absence, quickly scrambled toward the front door. They grabbed their coats and rushed out into the freezing night, whispering frantically among themselves about the sudden police presence abruptly terminating their free evening of drinking. They looked like rats fleeing a sinking ship. My golden child brother Elijah loudly attempted to argue with the uniformed officers in the middle of the living room. He puffed out his chest and pointed his finger aggressively in the lead deputy's face. The officer didn't say a word. He simply placed his hand heavily on his duty belt, staring Elijah down until my brother cowered, put his hands up, and scurried away toward the guest wing to pack his fraudulent designer clothes. Sitting completely silently inside my darkened vehicle parked safely across the quiet street, I carefully observed the chaotic eviction scene unfolding precisely according to my calculated legal strategy. I didn't miss a single crucial detail. I watched the armed police officers forcing my parents along with Elijah to hastily pack their essential personal belongings under strict continuous supervision. They weren't allowed to take the expensive furniture I bought. They weren't allowed to take the high-end electronics. They were only allowed to take their clothes and basic toiletries. Exactly 60 short minutes later, the front door opened again. My family members were forcefully ushered out into the brutal freezing winter night. They were awkwardly dragging hastily packed overstuffed suitcases and black plastic garbage bags full of coats. They looked incredibly desperate, shivering in the cold after officially losing the comfortable, beautiful shelter I had originally provided for them out of the goodness of my heart. The heavy front door was finally pulled shut by the lead officer. I heard the loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place. The authorities had officially concluded their prolonged period of financial exploitation and deceit. Aunt Sarah was standing on the icy curb a few houses down. Having been kicked out with the rest of the guests, she was huddled in her coat, watching my parents crying in the driveway. I finally turned the key in my ignition. The engine roared to life. I flipped on my bright headlights, illuminating the falling snow and casting a harsh glare directly onto my parents and Elijah standing helplessly in the driveway. They all turned and looked at my car. My mother recognized my vehicle immediately. She dropped her garbage bag of clothes and took a desperate step toward the street. raising her hand as if begging me to stop and save them from the nightmare they created. I didn't stop. I didn't roll down my window to hurl an insult. I simply shifted the car into drive and slowly cruised right past them. I made direct, unflinching eye contact with Aunt Sarah as I drove by. Her face was absolutely pale with terror. Finally, realizing that the quiet, obedient nephew she had been secretly manipulating for months was entirely gone, I drove out of the neighborhood, leaving them completely stranded in the freezing cold, exactly where they deserved to be. The following morning, the peaceful silence of my downtown apartment was abruptly shattered. An overwhelming barrage of text messages continuously bombarded my cell phone without a single pause. I rolled over, grabbed the phone off my wooden nightstand, and realized that the severe consequences of last night had already begun flooding the internet, demonstrating absolutely zero signs of genuine remorse for his severe criminal actions. Elijah had immediately taken to various popular social media platforms to aggressively play the innocent victim in front of his online followers. He published highly manipulative, lengthy posts blatantly twisting the objective truth. He falsely claimed that I had suffered a psychotic break and heartlessly kicked our elderly, fragile parents out into the freezing winter streets on Christmas Eve over a minor, silly misunderstanding about his business salary. He even set up a fraudulent crowdfunding page, begging strangers for emergency housing donations. But a few pathetic social media posts weren't their only weapon. My parents decided to aggressively escalate their malicious retaliation. They officially filed a severe legal complaint with the local Adult Protective Services Agency early that morning. They deliberately submitted entirely false accusations, claiming that I was currently experiencing a severe psychological breakdown. They told the government authorities that I was completely unhinged, dangerous, and mentally incompetent. It was a desperate, calculated attempt to legally strip away my rightful control over my personal financial assets and have a court-appointed conservator take over my wealth. I didn't even have time to finish my morning coffee before a formal representative from the state welfare agency arrived directly at my corporate office. Her name was Miss Jenkins. She walked into my office with a highly serious expression to conduct a mandatory emergency investigation into my mental competency based on their ridiculous claims. She sat across my heavy wooden desk holding a clipboard. Mr. Matthew, we received an emergency report from your immediate family stating that you are currently showing severe signs of mental instability. They claim you are not mentally sound enough to properly manage your corporate career or your financial assets. I didn't yell. I didn't act defensive. I calmly unlocked my bottom desk drawer and pulled out Wyatt's massive legally certified investigative dossier. I dropped it heavily onto the desk right in front of her. Ms. Jenkins, I said, maintaining absolute freezing composure. Here are my recent pristine medical records showing a perfectly clean bill of health. Alongside them are my fully transparent audited financial reports proving my total competence at this firm. But more importantly, inside that specific folder is irrefutable physical proof of federal mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft committed by the very people who called your office this morning. Miss Jenkins looked confused, but she opened the folder. I watched her eyes widen as she read the forged banking documents, the handwriting analysis, and the private detective summary of their criminal conspiracy. The truly unstable individuals, I stated clearly, leaning forward, are the ones actively trying to seize my personal assets by submitting an entirely fabricated retaliatory report to your government office just hours after being legally evicted for stealing $185,000 from a bank using my forged signature. My overwhelming mountain of undeniable physical proof caused their defamatory legal complaint to be officially dismissed on the exact spot. Miss Jenkins apologized profusely for interrupting my workday and immediately closed the file. They foolishly thought they could manipulate the legal system to declare me incompetent and steal my wealth. But their reckless strategy completely failed against my solid preparations. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Simultaneously, the massive public uproar my family had foolishly created across multiple social media channels actually triggered the most incredible satisfying twist of the entire ordeal. Elijah was so incredibly addicted to playing the wealthy CEO online that his own arrogance became his absolute downfall. That flashy picture he posted of himself leaning against the brand new Porsche 911, the very post that alerted my advisor, Carter, in the first place, accidentally captured the attention of someone far more dangerous than me. Because Elijah had arrogantly tagged his geographic location at an expensive downtown restaurant in that photo, a highly cautious senior banking executive named Mr. Harrison happened to see it pop up on a mutual connections feed. Mr. Harrison worked for the exact financial institution holding their illegitimate mortgage loan. Mr. Harrison immediately recognized Elijah's name from a recent, highly risky loan approval file. Seeing a man who supposedly just needed emergency capital to save his failing tech business suddenly flaunting a $130,000 luxury sports car immediately triggered massive internal alarm bells. The sudden digital spotlight prompted the banking executives to initiate an immediate, ruthless internal audit regarding all the submitted legal paperwork associated with the recently mortgaged residential property. They assigned a specialized team of professional financial auditors to meticulously examine every single document that had been filed by Elijah. They didn't even need my lawyer to call them. They found the massive discrepancies all on their own. The auditors quickly noticed the bizarre inconsistencies with the notary stamp. They immediately dragged David, the junior loan officer who had processed the application, into a windowless conference room for aggressive questioning. David was a weak, easily intimidated man. Under the intense threat of losing his own career and facing federal charges, David completely cracked. He frantically confessed everything. He admitted that he had deliberately bypassed the standard rigorous identity verification protocols because he had been privately heavily pressured by Joseph Miller, the corrupt notary public who was secretly taking a massive bribe from my brother. Because of this undeniable discovery of blatant internal financial deception, the massive financial institution didn't wait around. They immediately executed the necessary legal procedures to completely freeze all of Elijah's associated bank accounts. In a matter of hours, Elijah went from bragging online to having his entire illegal cash flow completely severed. His debit cards were declined at the grocery store. The sudden banking action officially triggered the beginning of a massive, unstoppable federal fraud investigation that would ensure he faced the maximum possible legal consequences for his deceitful actions. His own desperate need to look rich on the internet was the exact thing that burned his life to the ground. Exactly 1 week later, my phone was still constantly ringing with angry voicemails from distant relatives who had been completely brainwashed by Elijah's fake victim narrative online. Even my own cousins were calling me a monster. I ultimately decided to completely extinguish the rapidly escalating public relations nightmare once and for all. Instead of wasting my valuable time engaging in pointless, exhausting online arguments in comment sections, I decisively took control of the entire narrative. I drafted a highly formal, incredibly detailed legal statement through Lincoln's law firm. I didn't just send a boring letter. I aggressively distributed a massive digital folder directly to every single member of our extended family, every person who attended that Christmas party, and the local news outlets that had begun sniffing around the story due to the sudden banking freeze. Inside that digital folder was the absolute death blow to my family's reputation. I released the hidden security camera footage from my front porch, capturing crystal clear, undeniable audiovisual evidence of their incredibly cruel holiday toast. I let the entire world hear my mother loudly celebrating my absence. I let everyone hear Elijah saying no one liked having me around. But I didn't stop there. I publicly exposed the entire fraudulent mortgage application portfolio. I attached high-resolution scans of the undeniable banking documents containing the illegally forged signatures alongside the comprehensive private detective report outlining Joseph Miller's corrupt bribe. Distributing this undeniable evidence successfully exposed their true malicious faces to everyone they knew. It permanently destroyed the fake victim narrative Elijah had carefully constructed for the gullible internet audience. Almost immediately following the mass distribution of the files, public opinion completely flipped against my deceitful relatives. A massive wave of harsh, furious online criticism was aggressively directed straight toward Elijah and my parents. The furious digital backlash quickly forced multiple crowdfunding platforms to permanently lock down the fraudulent fundraising accounts Elijah had recently established. Sympathetic internet strangers finally realized they were being scammed by a verified financial criminal, and they demanded their money back by presenting the cold hard facts. I successfully transformed a petty family dispute into a highly publicized, undeniable federal financial fraud case featuring absolutely irrefutable physical evidence. They were completely, utterly ruined in the eyes of society. Being completely pushed into an inescapable legal and social corner by the undeniable public evidence, my parents became absolutely desperate. They knew they were facing total ruin, and they knew I was the only person with enough money and legal power to possibly save them. Later that afternoon, as I was walking out of my corporate building toward the parking garage, I saw them. My parents frantically arrived at my corporate parking lot and physically used their bodies to block my vehicle from leaving the premises. They looked terrible. They were wearing wrinkled clothes, and the arrogant, entitled attitudes they displayed on Christmas Eve were completely gone. They desperately attempted to use pathetic crocodile tears to manipulate my emotions. My mother aggressively grabbed the handle of my car door with a highly distressed expression, crying hysterically right in front of the surrounding office workers heading home for the day. They immediately shifted the entire blame directly onto Elijah. They claimed his criminal actions were simply the unfortunate result of momentary youthful impulsiveness, and that they had just been blindly following his lead out of love. "Matthew, please, I am begging you on my hands and knees to please call your lawyer and withdraw the investigative files from the federal authorities," Mom pleaded loudly, her makeup running down her face as she attempted to maintain her tight physical grip on my vehicle. Elijah was just being momentarily foolish with his startup. We didn't know how serious it was. We are still a family after all. Please don't let them send your brother to prison. I stared at her tear-stained face with absolute freezing emotional detachment. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The woman standing outside my car was a complete stranger who had happily forged my name to steal from me. I delivered my final unyielding response without raising my voice a single decibel. Committing severe financial fraud for $185,000 is absolutely not simple foolishness. I stated coldly, staring right through her. It is a severe federal crime. You made your choice when you picked up that pen and practiced forging my name on scratch paper. Matthew, we will lose everything. My father yelled, banging his fist on the hood of my car. The strict federal legal system will aggressively handle the necessary punishments that our broken family ties obviously cannot resolve, I continued, completely ignoring my father's outburst. My lawyer has all the files. My hands are completely clean. Do not ever approach me again. I decisively shifted the car into drive and slowly moved forward, forcing them to step back or get hit. I smoothly drove away from the corporate building, leaving my parents standing completely alone on the cold pavement. I deliberately abandoned them in that empty lot to desperately face the inevitable legal consequences resulting from their disastrous decision to blindly enable a financial criminal at my personal expense. 3 months later, all the chaotic public noise and frantic family phone calls finally concluded inside a heavily guarded federal courthouse. I sat completely silently on the hard wooden bench in the back row, wearing a sharp tailored suit, carefully listening to every single sworn statement originating from the presiding judge. The courtroom was tense. Elijah was not wearing a designer suit today. He was wearing a standard bright orange federal jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked pale, exhausted, and completely terrified. Joseph Miller, my former friend and the corrupt notary, sat at the defense table next to him, looking equally destroyed. The honorable judge meticulously reviewed the entire mountain of irrefutable banking evidence, the forged documents, and the detailed financial audit provided by the bank. He didn't show an ounce of sympathy. He officially delivered an incredibly strict judicial sentence that permanently altered their futures forever. The court strictly mandated that Elijah must completely relinquish his personal freedom by serving a mandatory sentence of 5 years inside a federal penitentiary facility to properly answer for his severe financial deception and wire fraud. Furthermore, the final judicial order legally compelled him to provide absolute economic restitution to fully compensate the defrauded financial institution for the stolen $185,000, without any possibility of declaring bankruptcy to escape his obligations. His precious, fraudulent Porsche 911 had already been aggressively seized and towed away by federal marshals weeks ago to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. Joseph Miller permanently lost his notary license and was sentenced to 3 years for his corrupt role in the conspiracy. Because of their direct supportive involvement in orchestrating the fraudulent mortgage application, my parents managed to avoid actual prison time due to their age. But they were left completely, utterly empty-handed. They permanently lost the comfortable retirement home I had generously provided for them. They are currently heavily burdened with a massive mountain of overwhelming legal debt from their defense attorneys. They are struggling to survive in a tiny rundown rented apartment in absolute social isolation. Our entire extended family, including the two-faced Aunt Sarah, completely alienated and abandoned them the exact moment their true malicious criminal nature was publicly exposed on the local news. They have nobody left to manipulate. I confidently walked out of the heavy brass courthouse doors and stepped out into the crisp, bright morning sun. I walked with an incredibly steady pace, deliberately leaving behind the desperate, pleading looks of my parents who were sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. I didn't offer a single glance of pity or forgiveness in their direction. They were ghosts to me now. My best friend Carter was waiting for me at the bottom of the courthouse steps, holding 2 hot coffees. He handed me one with a massive genuine smile. "It's finally over, man," Carter said, clinking his paper cup against mine. "Yeah," I replied, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. "It really is." Experiencing that completely toxic mess finally disappearing from my daily existence brought me an overwhelming sense of absolute freedom that I had never truly felt before in my entire life. I didn't have to carry the heavy burden of their unrealistic expectations anymore. I didn't have to constantly protect my wallet from my own bloodline. I was finally truly free to build my own life, surrounded only by people who genuinely respected and cared for me. Looking back at this entirely exhausting, incredibly dark emotional ordeal, I deeply realized a fundamental truth about life. Offering blind tolerance to manipulative relatives only provides extremely fertile ground for their selfish greed to continuously grow. If you don't draw a hard line, they will eventually destroy everything you have worked incredibly hard to build. The biological boundary of sharing the exact same bloodline should absolutely never serve as a permanent free pass to excuse deceitful toxic behavior. Being family does not justify blatant violations of federal law, and it certainly doesn't give anyone the right to steal from the people who generously trusted them the most. Actively choosing to aggressively protect your hard-earned personal assets alongside your fundamental self-respect remains the absolute prerequisite for living a dignified, peaceful life with your head held high. It doesn't matter if your opponent happens to be a stranger on the street or your closest family member. A thief is a thief regardless of their DNA. Decisively severing those highly toxic relationships might initially feel incredibly painful and lonely during the immediate aftermath. But I promise you that difficult boundary enforcement actually represents the greatest possible salvation for securing a peaceful and prosperous future for yourself. You have to be willing to walk away from the table when respect is no longer being served. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy and I know it was chaotic, but it was my reality and sharing it makes the burden a little bit lighter. I hope this resonated with you in some way, especially if you have ever felt trapped by the obligations of a toxic family. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation where you had to make a brutally hard choice to protect your own peace? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. Before you go, I have a special request for those of you who stayed with me until the very final second. If you are part of the 1% Club, the amazing group of people who actually watch these stories all the way to the end, drop a W in the comments below. That W stands for winner. It's our little secret code to recognize the people who understand the real value of standing up for yourself and winning your life back from toxic people. If my story helped you or if you just enjoyed the journey, please hit that like button and follow the channel. We are building a community of strong people here and I would love for you to be a part of it. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding basic respect. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.